On the outskirts of Berea, Kentucky, nestled among the rolling Appalachian foothills, stood the Whitaker family home, a weathered two-story farmhouse that locals described as always seeming closed up. It was here, on a property surrounded by dense woodland and accessible only by a winding gravel road, that one of America's most disturbing cases of isolation would eventually be discovered. But unlike traditional disappearance cases, the Whitaker siblings never physically vanished. Instead, they disappeared from society itself, hidden in plain sight for nearly 4 decades. The story begins in 1973, when Ray and Mary Whitaker, a reclusive couple with a reputation for keeping to themselves, welcomed the birth of their first child, Loretta. Over the next 5 years, Mary would give birth to 3 more children: Timothy in 1975, Margaret in 1976, and the youngest, Dennis, in 1978. Neighbors recall seeing the children occasionally in the early years, though always in the company of their parents and never interacting with other local children. By the spring of 1981, something changed. The children, who had occasionally been glimpsed playing in the yard or accompanying their parents on rare trips to town, suddenly vanished from public view. When questioned by a concerned school official about why the children weren't enrolled, Ray Whitaker claimed they were being homeschooled. In rural Kentucky during the early 1980s, homeschooling regulations were minimal, and authorities had little cause or jurisdiction to investigate further. The last confirmed sighting of any of the children came on June 12, 1981, when a delivery driver reported seeing several small faces peering from an upstairs window of the Whitaker home. After this date, for all intents and purposes, the Whitaker children disappeared from the outside world, though they had never physically left their home. Mary Whitaker died in 1998 from what county records list as natural causes, though no autopsy was performed. Ray continued to make occasional appearances in town, becoming increasingly disheveled and hostile toward anyone who inquired about his family. Locals developed a tacit understanding: avoid the Whitaker property and don't ask questions. The mailbox would occasionally be emptied, groceries would be delivered by a local store that Ray had arrangements with, and property taxes were paid on time through mail-in money orders. The Whitaker children, now adults, had effectively disappeared from society. No school records, no driver's licenses, no employment history, no medical records, and no social security numbers in active use. They existed only as names on birth certificates filed decades earlier. The most disturbing element, unknown to the outside world until much later, was that the siblings were not just isolated. They were the product of a consanguineous relationship, as Ray and Mary were first cousins, and this familial inbreeding would continue within the isolated household. The first real break in understanding what was happening inside the Whitaker home came in the winter of 2019, when Ray Whitaker, then 82 years old, collapsed while collecting his mail at the end of the property's long driveway. A passing neighbor found him unconscious in the snow and called emergency services. This medical emergency would inadvertently expose the hidden world behind the Whitakers' closed doors, a world where 4 adults had spent nearly 4 decades in complete isolation, their existence unknown to the outside world. If you want to follow more cases like this, which shake entire communities and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigation. When paramedics arrived at the Whitaker property on December 17, 2019, they found Ray Whitaker suffering from a severe stroke. The elderly man was quickly transported to the University of Kentucky Medical Center in Lexington. What happened next would trigger an investigation unlike any seen before in Madison County. Concerned that the elderly man lived alone in a remote location, social services were notified. When social worker Eliza Jameson arrived at the property to check for any caregiving needs, she made a discovery that would shock the conscience of the entire state. Upon knocking at the door, she was greeted by Timothy Whitaker, then 44 years old, who exhibited extreme fear, limited speech capabilities, and signs of significant developmental disabilities. I identified myself and explained I was there to help after Ray's hospitalization, Jameson later testified. The man at the door seemed terrified and kept repeating, "Dad said no people," over and over. When I asked if anyone else was in the home, he began rocking back and forth in distress. Sensing that something was severely wrong, Jameson contacted the Madison County Sheriff's Department. Deputies Keith Morris and Sarah Linden arrived at the property within the hour. What they found inside the home would be described in the official report as conditions of severe neglect and isolation beyond anything we've encountered. Inside the Whitaker home, authorities discovered all four siblings, Loretta, 46, Timothy, 44, Margaret, 43, and Dennis, 41, living in conditions described as primitive and unsanitary. None had ever attended school, received medical care, or interacted with the outside world beyond their property boundaries since early childhood. The investigation revealed that Ray had created an isolated compound, teaching his children that the outside world was dangerous and threatening. The initial investigation faced significant challenges. The siblings were deeply distrustful of authorities and had extremely limited communication skills. Their speech was described as a family dialect, English words used in unusual patterns with unique pronunciations that made them difficult to understand to outsiders. All four showed signs of intellectual disabilities and appeared to have no concept of modern society. It was as if they'd been frozen in time since the early 1980s, explained Detective Morris. The home had electricity, but only the most basic appliances. We found no computers, no phones, and a television that only played a small collection of VHS tapes from the 1980s. Their entire worldview had been shaped exclusively by their father. The investigation took a darker turn when medical examinations revealed that Margaret had given birth to at least 2 children, though no additional people were found in the home. Dental records and DNA testing would later confirm the devastating truth. The siblings had been engaged in incestuous relationships, likely encouraged or at least permitted by their father, and the resulting infants had not survived due to severe genetic abnormalities. Ground-penetrating radar would later identify several small graves on the far edge of the property, leading to charges of improper disposal of human remains being added to the growing list of allegations against Ray Whitaker, who remained hospitalized and unable to communicate due to his stroke. The investigation faced additional complications from the siblings' inability to provide coherent statements. Specialized interviewers were brought in from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, along with therapists experienced in extreme abuse cases, but progress was painfully slow. The siblings could provide only fragmentary glimpses into their isolated existence. What became increasingly clear was that Ray Whitaker had created a completely controlled environment, keeping his children in perpetual fear of the outside world while establishing himself as the sole authority on all matters. The children had been taught rudimentary reading from a small collection of outdated textbooks and religious materials, but their education was severely limited and skewed to reinforce their isolation. In my 22 years of law enforcement, I've never encountered a case where individuals were so completely removed from society while technically being free to leave, Sheriff Robert Anderson stated at a press conference on January 8, 2020. This represents a form of imprisonment and control that's difficult to comprehend. As the investigation progressed through early 2020, increasingly disturbing details emerged about life inside the Whitaker home. The siblings, now in protective custody and receiving medical and psychological care for the first time in their lives, began to reveal fragments of their isolated existence through specialized therapy sessions. Dr. Rebecca Holloway, a psychologist specializing in trauma and isolation cases, worked closely with the siblings. "What we're seeing is unprecedented in modern America," Dr. Holloway explained. "These individuals have experienced a form of sensory and social deprivation that has profoundly affected their development. They have no frame of reference for understanding the modern world." Medical examinations revealed the devastating physical toll of their isolation. All 4 siblings suffered from severe nutritional deficiencies, dental problems, and untreated chronic conditions. Timothy had an improperly healed broken arm from an injury that had occurred approximately 15 years earlier. Loretta showed signs of advanced osteoporosis unusual for her age, likely from a combination of poor nutrition and lack of sunlight exposure. Perhaps the most heartbreaking revelation came from genetic testing. DNA analysis confirmed that Ray and Mary Whitaker were indeed first cousins, and this consanguinity had continued into the next generation. The tests revealed that Dennis was not Ray's son, but rather the product of an incestuous relationship between Mary and an unidentified male relative who had visited the property in the late 1970s. This pattern of inbreeding had continued, with Margaret giving birth to at least 2 children fathered by her brothers. The genetic complications from multi-generational consanguinity likely contributed to the developmental issues we're seeing, explained Dr. Eleanor Mathis, a geneticist consulted on the case. The siblings all show signs of autosomal recessive disorders that become exponentially more common in closed genetic populations. The question that haunted investigators was how such isolation could have continued undetected for so long. Revelations from county records showed that concerns had been raised multiple times over the decades. In 1983, a public health nurse had attempted to visit the family after neighbors reported never seeing the children. Ray Whitaker had refused entry, claiming religious exemptions and threatening legal action. In 1991, a truancy officer had investigated but was similarly rebuffed. In both cases, follow-up was minimal, with authorities determining they lacked sufficient cause for intervention. There were institutional failures at multiple levels, admitted Madison County Commissioner Thomas Reynolds. In rural areas during that time period, there was a strong deference to parental rights and a reluctance to intervene in family matters without overwhelming evidence of abuse. Further investigation of the property revealed a complex system of gardens, livestock pens, and water collection systems that had allowed the family to be largely self-sufficient. Ray had made minimal trips to town for supplies that couldn't be produced on the property and had arranged delivery services for other necessities, always meeting delivery people at the end of the long driveway, never allowing outsiders near the house. The most chilling discovery came from journals kept by Ray Whitaker, found hidden in a locked chest in the attic. The journals, dating back to 1979, detailed his paranoid worldview and explicit plan to create what he called a pure family, isolated from the contamination of outside society. The writings revealed that what had begun as extreme religious beliefs had devolved into increasingly delusional thinking over the decades. Leave in the comments, never give up on truth if you believe that everyone deserves to be found and brought back into the light of society. The recovery and rehabilitation of the Whitaker siblings presented unprecedented challenges for the Kentucky Department of Human Services. Having spent their entire adult lives in isolation, they lacked the most basic social skills and understanding of modern society. Simple tasks like using modern bathrooms, selecting appropriate clothing, or understanding traffic signals were completely foreign to them. Each new experience, from riding in an elevator to seeing a smartphone, triggered profound confusion and often fear. It's as if they've time-traveled from the early 1980s into the present day, explained social worker Jameson. Concepts we take for granted are completely foreign to them. Margaret was terrified by automatic doors at the medical center. Dennis became overwhelmed to the point of collapse when exposed to a modern grocery store. On May 23, 2020, Ray Whitaker died in hospital care without ever regaining the ability to communicate. He left behind no statement, no explanation, and no apology for the 4 decades of isolation he had imposed on his children. The criminal case against him died with him, but the legal and social ramifications of the case continued to reverberate throughout Kentucky and beyond. The full truth of the Whitaker case emerged not as a single revelation, but as a complex mosaic of intergenerational trauma, mental illness, religious extremism, and institutional failure. Ray Whitaker's own childhood, investigators discovered, had been marked by isolation and abuse. Court records from the 1940s revealed that his father had been investigated multiple times for keeping his children out of school and for extreme religious practices. "We're seeing a tragic generational pattern," explained Dr. Holloway. Ray essentially recreated and amplified the isolation he experienced as a child, creating an even more extreme version for his own children. In August 2020, a special grand jury convened to investigate the systemic failures that had allowed the Whitaker situation to continue undetected for so long. Their findings, released in November, identified 23 specific instances where authorities had opportunities to intervene but failed to do so. The report led to significant reforms in Kentucky's child welfare system, including new protocols for following up on truancy cases and welfare checks. For the Whitaker siblings, the path forward has been fraught with challenges. The psychological impact of their lifelong isolation cannot be overstated. All 4 continue to require specialized care and supervision. Their adjustment to modern society has been both heartbreaking and inspiring to witness. Loretta, the eldest, has shown the most progress in adapting to her new life. With intensive therapy and education, she has developed limited but functional communication skills and can now perform basic self-care tasks independently. Timothy and Margaret continue to struggle with social interactions, but have formed close bonds with their caregivers. Dennis, the youngest, has perhaps had the most difficult transition, often retreating into nonverbal states when overwhelmed. The siblings now live in a specialized care facility in central Kentucky, where they receive ongoing therapy, education, and medical treatment. Their legal guardian, appointed by the state, has worked diligently to ensure their privacy, while providing them with opportunities for growth and healing. What happened to the Whitaker siblings represents one of the most extreme cases of isolation and control documented in modern America, said Kentucky Attorney General Rebecca Hamilton. Their story has forced us to re-examine our assumptions about freedom, family autonomy, and the responsibility of society to protect its most vulnerable members. The case has led to legislative changes in Kentucky, including the Whitaker Act passed in early 2021, which strengthens requirements for welfare checks and creates new protocols for identifying isolated children. Similar legislation is being considered in 12 other states. The Whitaker siblings' story serves as a powerful reminder of how individuals can disappear not by physically vanishing, but by being hidden from society in plain sight. Their journey from complete isolation to their current lives represents both a tragedy of lost potential and a testament to human resilience. For the investigators, social workers, and medical professionals who continue to work with the siblings, their progress, however incremental, provides hope that even after 4 decades of isolation, connection with the wider world remains possible. If you watched all the way through, it's because you care about these cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched all the way through," so I can get to know you and understand who really cares about the search for truth. Don't forget to like this video and share it with others who might be interested in these important stories that need to be told. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth investigations into cases that challenge our understanding of society and human nature.